Welcome to the realm of Tamriel. We all know Bethesda Game Studios might be one of the largest studios in the gaming world today, due to awesome creativity of one of the most brilliant-minded role-playing game series in history, the Elder Scrolls series. Now it's time to take you all back to ancient time, where the epic role-playing game series began 30 years ago, when the Elder Scrolls series started with their first game, Arena. Bethesda Game Studios was known as Bethesda Softworks back then. Bethesda Softworks was a small studio at the time, and it was founded in 1986. Bethesda Softworks had some small parts in some gaming projects from the late 80s to early 90s. But the first two game series Bethesda was involved with were the Wayne Gretzky hockey games and the Terminator games, even though the reception on those games were a hit and miss for some. But the successful growth of Bethesda started in the mid-90s. In 1994, Bethesda released their first Elder Scrolls game, Arena. Now, I actually got started into the Elder Scrolls series 2 gaming generations ago. Then, when I did some research on where the series started, I was a little confused. I mean, for a subtitle like Arena threw me off. Because a subtitle like Arena doesn't sound like a name for an RPG adventure. It sounds more like a battlefield competition fighting game with melee combat. And when I first saw the cover and the title, it sounded more like a spin-off in the series. But no, it's actually the very first Elder Scrolls game, and it's still a computer role-playing game. Now I have two questions here. Why a subtitle like Arena for a main entry, let alone being the first entry in the Elder Scrolls universe? Why didn't they just plain and simple title the first game Elder Scrolls? Well, I have answers to both questions. Arena was not intended to be a role-playing game. In fact, the Arena name was originally the main title of the game. Yes, simply titled as Arena. But what was Arena supposed to be all about? Well, Arena was supposed to be a player with a team of gladiators traveling across Tamriel to enter a rival gladiator team's arena as guests. And after you defeat every team all across the entire continent, your team would be awarded as Grand Champion in the capital of Tamriel, Imperial City. So Arena in general was meant to be a first-person gladiatorial team combat type of game. But Bethesda also thought it would make more of an impact in the game if they added side quests with role-playing gaming experience, plus a character creation and stat configuration which can be upgradable after going through arena battles and side quests. Bethesda thought at first that a first-person arena combat was more of a basic concept, but the second thought of adding RPG side quests for a variety of the game makes the game larger than life. It's not only like having to be well-trained fighters battling out, it's also having a background and a story for each character or each team as references to add more entertainment for your audiences and the judges. But it wasn't too long from there that Bethesda's influences from other role-playing games tells them that they can be more ambitious than they thought they were. So Bethesda decided to scrap the gladiatorial combat idea and turn Arena into a complete open-world role-playing game. Bethesda members were fans of Dungeons & Dragons series, Wizardry series, and the Ultima series. In fact, Bethesda were inspired by two 3D first-person role-playing games released in 1992. Ultima Underworld, which is more of a dungeon crawler role-playing game, and Legends of Valor, which is more likely an all-over-town role-playing game. I think that's how I say it. So those two role-playing games inspired Bethesda with a new idea to make their own fantasy role-playing game, with similarities of both games, with creative ideas of their own. Bethesda had ambition since the original idea of Arena, from being a gladiatorial team combat game to a full-blown role-playing game. Of course, from there on, more ideas for a role-playing game keeps popping up in their heads, like for instance, custom characters with different types of races, skill classes, and custom stats. Plus, traveling through Tamriel, going through adventures and looking for work, going into pubs to drink and sleep in, plus buying all sorts of weapons or armors or potions or spells that you'll need during your adventures from weapons and armor shops, or spells or potions from the Mages Guild, or selling off some of the goods that you found during your adventures. Plus you can break into houses anytime, or businesses at nighttime when they're closed, and possibly get caught or killed by local town's guards. And there's tons of other fantasy elements. Their ideas for RPG game continue to grow from there. And they try to ram as much into the game as they possibly can. When Bethesda decided to do away with these arena battles by replacing a huge open world system for the player to explore and do quests, that's when Bethesda realized a full-blown role-playing game is the way to go than the arena gladiatorial combat concept. So they abandoned the arena team combat idea altogether and focused more completely on Arena being a role-playing game. But there were a few issues during development. The material with the main title Arena had already been printed, and it seems that nothing from the already printed material can be removed, also meaning the name cannot be changed, but something can be added to avoid as much confusion as possible. What they did was added a more convincing name for a role-playing game title, The Elder Scrolls, and now having Arena as a subtitle. So Arena was considered to be the first chapter in the Elder Scrolls series. Bethesda also managed to make the use of the name Arena to fit into the main story of the first chapter. Arena became an alias for the world of Tamriel, since the Empire of Tamriel was violent and out of control. I guess that does make sense, and it does kind of make up for the mistake on Bethesda's behalf. There was also another issue about the game's release. Bethesda rushed the game for a Christmas release in 1993, but they went over the deadline. So, the game was released 3 months later, in March of 1994, which at the time they couldn't afford any more delays before that, regardless on how the execution is, or how it will turn out to be once it's released. And that does not sound like a good sign, and you'll soon find out why. Elder Scrolls Arena was first released on 8 3.5-inch floppy disks. At the beginning of distribution, the game sold about 3,000 copies. The game had a lot of groundbreaking bugs. Arena was very buggy. The game was difficult for several wrong reasons. And with a misleading title that sounds more like a basic combat than an actual role-playing game, didn't help the sales at first either. But as time goes by, some role-playing game fans did realize that Elder Scrolls Arena is a role-playing game, and the word got spreaded out where it skyrocketed sales, to the point where it became a cult classic, which led Bethesda into making an enhanced CD-ROM version of Arena, and eventually releasing the deluxe edition that includes the CD-ROM version of the game, with a Codex Sienta hint book and a bonus mousepad. The floppy disk version of Arena eventually became a freeware version for modern operating systems in 2004, 10 years after game release, which required a DOSBox emulator, plus fiddling around with the settings on the DOSBox for Arena is recommendable if you want to get the game running properly. because the default settings really sucks for that version. But since it's a floppy version of Arena, running the game through the DOS box is at least kind of simple. But you may want to Google for the knowledge for the proper settings for Arena. But I can still imagine playing the freeware floppy version of Arena on modern operating system is much easier than running the original copy of 8 floppy disks through the original hardware. But at least years later, digital distribution like Good Old Games or Steam eventually got Arena and Daggerfall. What's even better about Arena on digital distribution for like Good Old Games, it actually has the CD-ROM version. Of course, the only downside is, unlike many other games on GOGs where they actually have a choice between floppy or CD-ROM, you can only play the CD-ROM version. Yeah, they don't have the floppy version on there. But what's better about the CD-ROM version, of course, it's pre-configured. Of course, if you're not satisfied with the settings, you can always fix them for the DOSBox system. And both digital distributions are available for free. After Bethesda's first Elder Scrolls release on the floppies, they went to work immediately on the sequel, Daggerfall, which became a huge improvement over Arena. But that doesn't mean Bethesda ignored the aftermath of Arena's first release. They managed to patch up Arena as much as they can before they released the CD-ROM version. But Bethesda's main goal was making the sequel a huge success, which they did reach that goal. So that kind of explains why Arena never got fully patched up to this day. Not even the latest release with the CD-ROM version on digital storefronts. So the best way to play Arena anymore is on GOG or Steam. And I've been playing it on GOG the most. Let's now start up the game, shall we? And of course this will be the CD-ROM version. Starting game. After you get Arena up and running, you are greeted with the Elder Scrolls Chapter 1 Arena title screen. Then the game greets you with a brief history of Tamriel. Then it takes you to the menu. After you get Arena up and running, the title screen will pop up to remind you that Arena is Chapter 1 in the Elder Scrolls series. Then you get a quote from a Blade Master legend from the First Era. The best techniques are passed off by the survivors. After the Arena title menu and the quote from the Blade Master legend, a brief history on a scroll will unroll explaining about the backstory of Tamriel, on how the continent became a ruthless place, like from the beginning with all these faction wars. Until Tiber Septim put a stop to them all and took control, proclaiming himself as the Emperor of Tamriel. Tiber Septim took control to keep the peace for since he was in power, which set a course for many generations to come. But 492 years later, Emperor Uriel Septim VII celebrates his 43rd birthday, but jealous hearts desire his throne and plot his downfall. So the citizens of Tamriel refer to this continent as the Arena Continent. It says that hope flies on death's wings. Prepare then, for as the Elder Scrolls foretold, it will be here that your adventure begins. Then comes the Arena game menu with 3 choices: load save game, start a new game, or exit. A basic menu. So I guess the history of Tamriel being referred to as being a giant arena does seem to make up for the story of the game having the arena name as a subtitle. So, it does sound more fitting to be the first chapter in the Elder Scrolls series. But now we're at the menu, so it's now time to start a new game. And you will be greeted with the current situation surrounding Tamriel. And like I said before, the enhanced CD-ROM version of Arena would be the better way to go between the two versions. But the best way to go is the GOG digital version or the Steam version that has the pre-configured CD-ROM version. Now I'm going to give you all some advice. When playing Elder Scrolls Arena, you must create your character wisely. Because in this open world environment of Tamriel, leveling up your character is extremely necessary. It's always best to roam around inside or outside of towns or caves to fight smaller enemies and find some loot to either use to defend yourself or to sell for some extra gold for something that you really need, as well as leveling up, before you move forward into the main quest. Looting in the arena is based on luck, because if you find a storage pile or loot off a corpse or a creature, and whatever you find is completely random. And sometimes you will find nothing. It can also vary on the stats of your character, and sometimes in the arena you can find a powerful or high value item by pure luck, which in a way is a rarity. And believe me, luck is one big thing you would need to have on your side for this adventure, because shit will happen all the time. Creatures at times will pop up randomly. You must save your game constantly. Two other main keywords besides arena are part of dealing with this adventure. Constantly and randomly, because shit constantly happens all the time, and shit randomly appears all the time, and usually it's something unwanted. It's like a snake that can sneak up on you and bite you in the ass. In other words, it's easy to die in the arena. And it's not just that you die in the arena frequently, but due to arena being flawed, you can either get stuck in some spots, or the game can crash at any time. So that's why when you advance and get more stuff or experience points, you want to save your game frequently. Now, what's the current situation, as well as the main goal in Arena? Well, the game's setting begins in Tamriel on the 389th year of the Third Era, when Emperor Uriel Septon VII summons his advisor and Imperial battle mage, Jaeger Farn, over concerns of betrayal from within the court. It transpires that the Emperor's concerns were justified when Jaeger Farn is revealed to be the traitor and a total power-hungry scumbag. The Emperor's concerns were justified, all right. After when Tharn magically traps the Emperor and his general, Talon Warhalf, into another dimension to proclaim Septon's throne for himself. And if you think that was a bad move on the behalf of Jaeger Farm, well, the worst is yet to come. When Jaeger Tharn proceeds to magically disguise himself as the Emperor in order to usurp the throne, his conspiracy is witnessed by a mage apprentice, Rhea Selmain, whom he murders before she can warn the Elder Council. Tharn then summons his demon minions to replace the Emperor's guards, including the court official and the subordinate of General Warhalf, and his soldiers. Then Tharn sends the main character to die in the Imperial dungeons. Tharn obviously needs somebody to finger for Rhea Selmain's murder, after all. Yep, Jaeger Tharn is one evil son of a bitch. But the good news is, this is where the main protagonist comes in. And it's not just a chance of hope for him or her, but it's a chance of hope to free Tamriel from the hold and the manipulation that Jaeger Tharn put on them. Or secretly put on them. Following the death of Rhea Selmain and the imprisonment of the main protagonist, Rhea Selmain uses her magic to take an incorporeal form, holding herself together long enough from the spirit in the sky to inform the imprisoned player of Tharn's betrayal and instructs the player throughout the player's escape from the infamous dungeons.
Do not fear, for it is I, Rhea Selmain. Listen to me. There are no others left to carry on this fight. You have been left in this cell to die. Jaeger Tharn, Imperial Battle, Mage of Tamriel, has taken on the guise of the true Emperor. He does not see you as a threat, being only a minor part of the Imperial Court. In that act of arrogance, he has made his first mistake. Look to the north wall of the cell. You will find a ruby key which will unlock the door. Take it and make your escape. The passages here were once used by Tharn to hide treasures he had stolen from the Emperor's coffer. If you wish, you can gather enough to support yourself away from the Imperial seat. Be careful. There are many creatures which inhabit the sewers now, vile rats and goblins. It is too late for me, for I am already dead. Only my powers as a sorceress keep me between this life and the next. That power, however, is waning. Do not succumb to greed, or you may find these tunnels to be your final resting place as well. I can still work my magic to a certain extent. If you travel west from this cell, then south, you will find a shift gate. It will transport you far enough from the center of the Empire that you should be safe. If you survive these sewers, you will see me again. Remember, Tharn has taken on the guise of the Emperor. No one will gainsay his word for yours. I will come to you again in your dreams, so it is imperative that you rest from time to time. In that way, I will be able to communicate with you and lend my aid. You are entering a dangerous arena, my friend. One in which the players are beings beyond your mortal comprehension. I do not envy your role. There is, however, a power within you as yet untapped. Look for me when you have gained experience in the world. You are my last and best hope.
Past that point, Selmain lacks the power to manifest physically and only appears to the player during dreams. She creates the key to allow the player to escape the dungeons and teleports the player to a different province through a mystical shift gate. The player is informed that the only way to stop Thorn is to get a hold of the Staff of Chaos, which the Staff of Chaos holds Thorn's life force. But the staff has been splitted by Thorn into many fragments throughout the continent of Tamriel. So you most likely have to go through each province of Tamriel, if not all, to get each piece of the staff. So Maine was helpful on where to begin. Once you collect the first fragment, the next time you rest, Rio will also appear in my next dream to provide me the general location of the next fragment.
Shall see you in such suffering that you will grovel for the sweet release of death.
But once you get a hold of the first fragment of the Staff of Chaos, Jaeger Farn finds out about my escape and what I'm trying to do, and he visits me in my dreams time to time. Then he sends his minions after me. Let's speed this thing up, and this will contain spoilers, because going through this adventure is far from being simple.
I have watched as you blundered your way to this place. At one time, I even considered approaching you with an offer to lead my Imperial Guard. But it is plain that you are not worthy of such a position. Be not fooled by what you would call success in your journey across the Empire, for you have never faced a being as powerful as I. Your death shall be slow and torturous, a suffering that shall span the millennium. Come, I await you in the dungeons below.
At the end of the quest, the player finds the final piece and resembles the Staff of Chaos. However, this does not release the Emperor, because the staff's power has been drained into the Jewel of Fire. After the Staff of Chaos has been put together, the player travels to the Imperial City to confront Jagerfarn and his minions. Then the player battles Jagerfarn. Then near the end, the player uses the Jewel of Fire and touches it with the Staff of Chaos. That destroys both the Jewel and the Staff, as well as releasing the Emperor. The Jewel also turned out to be where Tharn has stored his life force, and the destruction of the Jewel resulted in his death.
Truly a child of the Empire, I thank thee for thy assistance. I have a particular idea as to the question of your service in mind. From this day forth, thou art named the Eternal Champion. From thy hand shall be dealt the needs of the Empire. I, Uriel Septim, true Emperor of Tamriel, do decree and thus make law. Arise, my champion, and take thy rightful place at my side.
As a token of respect and gratitude, Uriel Septon grants the player the title of Eternal Champion, and Rhea Selmain finally enters the afterlife in peace. So once you get to the self-proclaimed ruler of Tamriel, Jaeger Thorn, you must eliminate him and free the Emperor and his general in one of two ways. By one way is to battle Thorn and killing him, or the other way, like I said, is to use the Staff of Chaos on the Jewel of Fire to destroy Thorn. Either way, if you succeed, you're victorious. The Emperor and his general are free. Justice for Rhea Selmain has been served. People all across Tamriel are free from the threat of Jaeger Thorn, and the player will be known as the Eternal Champion of Tamriel, also known as the Champion of Arena. I know I just gave the ending away, but then again, going through this adventure from start to finish is far from being simple. Not because of the game's difficulty, but also the flaws in the game most certainly doesn't make the game any easier. And Murphy's Law does exist all around this game, and I think I made that clear already. Now, for the first entry in the Elder Scrolls series, it may be flawed and dated, but I do have a soft side for it. Or maybe a bigger soft side for Arena than expected. So before I address the cons, I must address the pros. Now, I must give Bethesda credit for their effort on how they started the franchise to begin with. And it's still been going strong after 30 years. Even though the first entry in the series may be flawed and limited, but Arena still has its wonderful, charming moments. And no matter what you think of the first Elder Scrolls game compared to the successors, without Arena, there wouldn't be a franchise. The cover for Arena was really badass and well detailed. Even though the cover itself was meant to be for the original concept, which was the gladiatorial combat, before they decided to go with a full-blown role-playing game, the cover art still is a masterpiece. And to give credit where it's due, I think Arena has the best cover art out of all the Elder Scrolls games. That's pretty much by far the only one-up that the first entry has, is the best cover art. You might have noticed in the majority of the follow-ups of the Elder Scrolls games, each game is set in provinces. You know, like the third game where it's set in Morrowind, or the fifth game set in Skyrim. In the first game, Arena, it's set all across Tamriel, where you can go to any province. And if you play the later Elder Scrolls games, you can tell each province is different than the other. But in Arena, when it comes to comparing with all provinces, they're still different, but graphical-wise, technology-wise, and limitation-wise, all provinces in Arena are more likely the same. But it's still nice that you can go all across Tamriel and go into any province or city you like. Yes, you can go to cities in each province as well. But graphical-wise and limitation-wise, there's not much to it. The story for Arena is amazing and well written, and I do like the idea of finding each piece of the Staff of Chaos from every layer in each province. But of course, you have to do tasks for the task giver in order to get the destination to your reward. But this is where the cons come into this part. In between the quests, like doing odd jobs and upgrades, can be a real time-consuming pain in the ass and a complete hassle. And it always gets repetitive. And worst case scenarios, if you forget to save as frequently as you should, and if you die or the game crashes on you, I think you understand. Alright, back to the pros. The music on both floppy disk and CD-ROM versions of Arena by Eric Huberling are fantastic and enjoyable to listen to. The character customizing for the first entry in the Elder Scrolls series is impressive, but you've got to put some thought into what character you're creating and how you're leveling up, because it's a cruel world out there. So, practically there are interesting things about Arena in general. You also get to explore the entire continent of Tamriel, but with limited graphic palettes, objects, and sprites. Blood animations on creatures or rivals after you kill them are pretty cool. The fantasy elements in Arena were there, if limited. The character customizing is decent, if not great. You just gotta choose wisely. Bethesda was ambitious for the first entry in the Elder Scrolls series. It's just that there were quite a few mistakes during development before release. Which now reminds me, it's now time to drop a few cons about Arena. Well, ones I practically hadn't addressed yet, even though the ones I already addressed I'll probably repeat again, since I'm going to be explaining about the cons, so it's best to get them all out all together. Anyway, now it's time to explain about the drawbacks. Now, I'm not quite sure myself on where to start when it comes to the cons of Arena, because there's plenty of them. Well, I can start off by saying, for the first entry in the Elder Scrolls series, it's much harder and frustrating than it is enjoyable. Now, I already said that in between quests, like doing odd jobs and upgrades for character can be real time-consuming pain in the ass and a complete hassle. Rinse and repeat, it gets old really quick. No matter what version of Arena you own or play to this day, the game is always going to be flawed. One of the main reasons is because Arena had been rushed for a release date back in 1993, and Bethesda were more focused on their second entry in the Elder Scrolls series. When playing the Arena floppy version through DOSBox manually, you have to tweak through the DOSBox settings, and even with the GOG pre-configured CD-ROM version, you still have to, in somewhat ways, tamper with the DOS settings in the Arena folder. The graphics in Arena are okay, but not great on every landscape. NPCs or enemies, they might have been more decent 30 years ago, but as time goes by, looking at them now, they're not on par with other games that were released by that time, or before, or after. The 2D sprites, with most of the generic NPC enemies in Arena, look like cookie cutters. Even though I do admit, some of them do look intimidating, but not enough to satisfy me. The gameplay for Arena in general is stiff. The controls for Arena are kind of out of place. You can't look up and down. The draw distance in Arena is short and weak. Jumping is not always responsive in Arena. The combat system in Arena is clunky. The sound effects for Arena don't always execute properly with AI, mainly in combat. And when you try to pick up a key in Arena, like at the beginning, you have to be standing in the proper spot to pick it up. What else? Oh, you're also going to get stuck in some areas. And the only two ways to get out of stuck positions that I know of is to restore a saved game or quit game due to the fucking flaws. But at least enemies can get stuck in some odd spots too, leaving them vulnerable to attack. So at least that glitch can be useful to me at times too. But when you're below a platform, mainly in a dungeon, and straight above, an enemy can attack you, but you can't always attack an enemy from the bottom position. And even worse, if you're standing on a pond, when standing below, you can't use your weapon at all, which leaves you defenseless. Now that's some bullshit there. And when you fall off the cliff, you have to stand in the proper position to climb back up by pressing the forward key, and it takes about 5 seconds to climb back up. And if you fall into the water, the music changes and it takes more than 5 seconds to climb back up, because the game has to load. And after you climb back out of the water, the music changes back. And when trying to climb up on a platform, you have to move forward in the correct spot. And it takes roughly about 10 seconds to get your ass up there. Sometimes 5, sometimes 10. What the hell? What more do I need to address? Yes, with its limitation of side quests in Arena, they do tend to get repetitive and staled really fast. The enemies are always going to sneak up on you, and your life bar will drain without you noticing before you either take damage from your health bar or until it's too late. It doesn't have anything to do with your skill either. In fact, the audio between the music, ambient sound, and sound effects for Arena are constantly off at times. A fucking convoluted mess indeed. The graphics might have seen better days, but I can imagine back then they were running out of time to get the animations around the AI characters detailed properly, as well as the gameplay physics. There's still more to address. Just about done here. Okay. Arena game at times always freezes, which in worst case scenario, if you accomplish a lot and if the game freezes, or when you get killed even for that matter, and if you didn't save your game, then you're fucking screwed. And that's one of the main reasons why saving your game constantly is very necessary, especially back then when they didn't have autosaves. Speaking of Arena game freezing up, I believe running an original physical copy of Arena on older hardware can be worse when it comes to that situation. You can ask Clint from the Lazy Game Reviews about that. But running a digital version through DOSBox on a modern OS or a pre-configured GOG version doesn't help much. But at least it's less of a hassle doing it that way. And I also mentioned the idea for Arena on paper, that exploring the whole entire continent sounds like a game is giving you more freedom. But going to each province is just the same as the other provinces, except with different color palettes. And exploring Tamriel sounds like a tour, but it's just the same shit everywhere. But since it's their first entry, I can't blame them. Now, my final verdict on Elder Scrolls Arena. I went through the whole game once about 6 or 7 years ago, and I actually chose a female character who resembles in between the warrior babe on the front cover and Princess Zelda from the Zelda games, except I made Princess Zelda look more badass. I decided to make her a wood elf, which her province is Valenwood, and her class is warrior. I ripped and tear so many hours to get through the game, and I choose to do the job, just like that. And I decided to play a little bit of it recently so I can get back on track on remembering how aggravating this game really is. I played a little bit of Arena again so I can get caught up for this project. But this time, I decided going through the whole entire game again isn't worth my time. And that's as far as I'm going to go with the first entry in the Elder Scrolls series. Arena is just not worth my time anymore. So I beat the game once, with a female character. And I think a female fighter is totally appropriate for this adventure. But still, I'm so done with Arena. And it pains me to say this because the story, the cover art, and the music are the main things I love about Arena. But everything else about Arena is pointless, especially these days. One time around for Arena is good enough for me. However, it would be awesome if they do a proper remake of the game using the Unity engine or the Unreal engine or Bethesda's latest creation engine, because if not, I'm not going to revisit Arena game again. So, unless Bethesda or any modder does a remake from scratch, I'm totally done with Arena. And if you want to start off on your Elder Scrolls journey that has a much higher replay value, then I would skip the first entry and start off with Chapter 2, Daggerfall. Well, that's it with the first chapter in the Elder Scrolls series. Arena was the first Elder Scrolls game, and it had seen better days, if far from excellent. But thank God I'm done. Never playing this game again, unless if they do a faithful remake. And thank you all very much for your time. And this is Dixon of the Ultimate Gaming Realm, leaving the realm of Tamriel, but we'll return to Tamriel in a different Elder Scrolls game. And this is Dixon of the Ultimate Gaming Realm, logging off.